Derek Chauvin has been convicted of the murder of George Floyd. What does this case, which has potency and meaning even beyond the tragic murder of one individual by a member of the police force, mean for American culture going forward and American society? What conclusions can we draw from it? Benjamin Crump, a lawyer for the Floyd family, said in a statement, "Justice for Black America is justice for all America. This case is a turning point in American history for accountability of law enforcement and sends a clear message we hope is heard clear in every city and every state." Accountability is a word that's being used regularly in the ongoing conversation around this matter. Accountability in relationship to justice. It's difficult to conceive of what justice might look like in a matter that, beyond the murder of an individual, has come to represent a historic climate of abuse between state authority and the section of the population from which George Floyd comes. It made me question the relationship of the governed and the governing. Police authority acts as an enforcer of government law. It can be assumed, therefore, that if the police force behaves in a particular manner, they are acting in the interests of the government. And because we operate under the assumption, I think particularly now, that the government operates on behalf of powerful interests primarily and on behalf of the population as a secondary consideration and only when necessary, this case is significant because it brought to the forefront sometimes submerged narratives around race and power, but I suppose also it provided a cataclysmic event that has to be seen, I suppose, in the context of how the Trump administration was regarded and the ongoing bifurcation between right and left, and the presumption that left-wing politics is more neatly aligned with matters of social justice and that the right might be affiliated with state authority whilst regarding the state with suspicion. That's one of the fundamental tenets of the right. Increasingly, I've come to regard all centralised power with suspicion. Increasingly, my feeling is that we have to look beyond traditional divisions within politics, particularly if what we're looking for, as Benjamin Crump said, is a turning point. A turning point. When we've made videos recently about law enforcement, increased police powers, the restrictions around protests, it's made me realise that there are fundamental questions that need to be examined about the way that power operates. This symbolic moment, the brutal and visceral and disgusting visible murder of George Floyd, is a matter so extreme that I feel it ought bring about unity rather than division, that all of us could collectively come together and agree that there is a massive requirement for change, that there are issues at stake that are necessarily only able to be addressed by particular sections of the population. Specifically, of course, I refer to race as a matter that in this time requires that it is spoken about with a degree of caution, and that someone like me, a person who is English and a white person and male, has to speak with a degree of sensibility about what would be termed in certain areas of this discourse my particular privileges. But my hope for humanity going forward is that more general principles will be set in place when we organise the systems that we are critiquing here, i.e. government and the enforcement of state power through officers of the law. This might sound a bit woolly to you, but compassion and kindness properly understood and practiced would mean that we forego all forms of discrimination on the basis of sex, gender or race. Kindness, compassion and accountability would mean that we have a collective ability to look at the legacy of colonialism and racism and recognised that there is a restitution that is required for a culture to heal, that is of such significance and size that it would be revolutionary in its nature. When Professor of Black Studies Kehinde Andrews talks about restitution, not in the United States, or reparations rather, not in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, he points out that apt and appropriate reparations to African nations for colonisation would mean the dismantling of the United Kingdom. Such is the significance of the economic debt. Similarly, in my conversation with Marianne Williamson, former Democratic candidate, who talked about reparations in her campaign to be the Democratic nominee for president, she said that reparations could be offered in a manner according to some previous piece of speculative legislation, a certain amount offered to each descendant of former slaves. When we had that discussion, though, I said that the economic component, while significant, is not the total problem. When people say systemic racism, white supremacy, institutionalised racism, I feel that it's important to acknowledge that whilst these things may take place at an individual level, that there are individual racists, clearly, there are individual acts of racism, clearly. Institutional racism, by its nature, suggests that there are some attitudes and perspectives that are so insidious and entrenched that the participants are unaware of them. And for me, this is such a deep subject that you can't confine it to a subject even as enormous and as significant as race. We're talking about a complete reevaluation of the way that power is organised. We're talking about a reevaluation of history. No one should be afraid of this. As Benjamin Crump said, this is a victory not just for Black America, but all America. Indeed, if there is to be an America at all, can there be ideological segregation? Can we afford to regard ourselves in opposing or even discrete cultural encampments? For us to reach the kind of ideals that are being discussed here, fairness, accountability, justice, an accountable system of government, reliable authority and law enforcement that feels like it operates in service, i.e. even the most trashy, disposable, cliched, scratched on a door maxims such as protect and serve, if they were to be lived, would include a police force that is truly accountable to the population that it protects and serves. That it wouldn't feel, and I mean on a colloquial, parochial, everyday level, like a conflict between authority and a person that is being governed, oppressed, controlled, or in extreme cases murdered. It would seem like an equal relationship between peers. Can this ever take place with the unaddressed history and entrenched systems that currently abide? I wonder if it is possible for the many, many poor and dispossessed people of this world, of all colours, to find solutions without addressing systemic abuses of power and unaddressed historic abuses of power. Don't you think sometimes that all the poor people in the world, regardless of what distinctions there might be, have more in common with one another than they do with the people that are charged with their governance? And certainly more in common with each other than the people that government actually serve. When I say people, I suppose I mean institutions. That's to say, this must fulfill Benjamin Crump's speculative post-verdict statement, i.e. it must become something that can unify all people, that we must, however complicated it may be, enter into a conversation of unity and togetherness, true reparation and restitution, true apology, a shared vision of what justice can be. I suppose we have to ask ourselves as well, is progress something that we want? I'm sure we all do. I'm sure there's no one alive, I hope there's no one alive that wants to see more brutality, that welcomes and enjoys policing that is unconscious, vindictive, nefarious, that leads to such abysmal results. I wonder where too the solution may lie. Does it lie in the direction of defunding and dismantling the police? Does it lie in totally new social contracts conceived together? Is it possible that all of us, ordinary people, can find a way of communicating together clearly and openly, looking to overcome our distinctions and differences, and fulfilling the legacies of great civil rights leaders of 50 years ago, and finding fraternity, brotherhood and sisterhood among one another, regardless of the colour of our skin? Great men and women have protested and died for this issue in that great country, the United States of America. I wonder if this death, which has become the epitome of long entrenched historic conflicts, can provide a kind of catalyst, a cultural catharsis that can lead to something more positive than further entrenchment, further opposition, something that can get beyond politics and to the place that politics comes from, a sincere place, a sincere wish to organise fairer, more just systems that include everyone, that are set up for the benefit of everyone, and don't assume particular power dynamics have to continually play out, that certain systems have to be conserved and controlled. I wonder if this can be not a minor victory for accountability, but a great victory for justice. Justice for all people, regardless of the way that they look or the way that they appear.